Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Diplomat Couch. My name is Osli Matsikenyeri. As you may well know, the month of March is International Women's Month, and on the 8th of March we celebrated International Women's Day with the UN Women theme being Digital, Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality. And today the Diplomat Business Network is hosting a business breakfast where different panelists are going to be talking about creating safe workspaces for women. Join us as we follow the proceedings.
It is an honor to join you during this Women's History Month as we continue to celebrate the achievements and draw attention to the challenges. The International Labour Organization, ILO, reports that globally, 1 in 5 people has experienced violence and harassment at work, whether physical, psychological, or sexual. In Zimbabwe, the baseline survey on sexual harassment conducted by the Public Service Commission came to a similar conclusion and further indicated that the majority of perpetrators are to be found among supervisors, that's 38% of the perpetrators, and among peers. It means the colleagues in the workspace, 28% of perpetrators. These statistics, you will agree with me, are not only alarming, they actually call for serious and urgent attention. The United Nations and regional treaty systems have recognized gender-based violence and sexual harassment as human rights abuses. The Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, some of you might know it, and the Protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Women in Africa, also known as the Maputo Protocol, are critical instruments that obligate state parties to take appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in all areas of public and private life. More recently, ILO's Convention on Violence and Harassment, also known as the Convention 190, became the first international instrument on labor standards to provide a common framework to prevent, remedy, and eliminate violence and harassment in the world of work. Here in Zimbabwe, the government has put in place laws that protect employers and employees from GBV and sexual harassment, which is highly commendable. The provisions on sexual harassment are contained in a combination of legislation that range from administrative laws to penal codes to labor legislation. However, ladies and gentlemen, sexual harassment does not attract criminal sanctions for perpetrators, and Zimbabwe is yet to ratify ILO's Convention 190. We remain hopeful that this will be given due consideration in the near future, especially since data from ILO, from the Public Service Commission, and the Zimbabwe Gender Commission all point to the fact that women are disproportionately affected by sexual harassment and GBV, gender-based violence, in the workplace compared to men. And this applies to both the public and the private sector. Now, we can all agree that the lack of reliable national data prevents a full understanding of the extent of sexual harassment in the world of work. But what we know for sure is that it is an issue that is largely underreported. It's a silent issue due to the fear of stigmatization and retaliation. And we also know that the consequences of GBV and sexual harassment in the workplace are very serious. The even greater costs that are hidden behind loss of productivity, mental health issues, and intergenerational trauma. Those are often not seen, yet they are probably the most serious cost of GBV and sexual harassment. Now, countries have tried to address this issue in many different ways. Some of them consider it a crime, some of them a human rights violation, and some have come up with commensurate sanctions. But let's face it, it is hard to prove in courts, and very few victims are willing to go through the long, costly, exhausting, and at times humiliating court procedures. The issue of evidence in gender-based violence and sexual harassment, in my view, must be re-examined And an effective remedy will require the active participation of all stakeholders, especially men. This is why at UN Women, we have established the He for She campaign globally. And here in Zimbabwe, the He for She group of diplomats since 2018. Now, this group, I want to recognize them today because they have been instrumental in advocating for the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse in the workplace, working together with heads of missions, heads of UN agencies, and the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries. Through our Spotlight initiative, funded by the European Union, the UN, together with government, employer organizations, trade unions, private sector, and civil society, has supported the baseline study on sexual harassment in the public service. We've also supported a strategy for the elimination of sexual harassment in the workplace that runs from 2021 to 2025, and a training module on gender and sexual harassment. The Spotlight initiative also facilitated the development of the Model Workplace Program, which entails training of gender champions in the private sector, holding employers accountable, and facilitating awareness-building activities. And we've done this because knowledge among workers and awareness tend to lead to reduced cases and increased reporting. At the global level, UN Women also established the Generation Equality Campaign, which includes a dedicated pillar on GBV, including sexual harassment. And this is done to ensure that the issue remains a priority, building on the watershed moments, such as those created by the Me Too movement a few years back. Now, I would like to take the opportunity of having such an audience of distinguished guests who are working in the private sector, in the public sector, who are change makers. If you weren't change makers, you would not be in this room. So thank you for being here. And I do want to take the opportunity to invite each and every one of you in this room to speak up and help address GBV and sexual harassment in public and private spaces, offices, homes, in our communities, in public transport, and to remember that the victims are often amongst the most vulnerable women, interns in workspaces, junior staff, domestic workers in our homes, women living with disability, and so on. Allow me to pause at this juncture and share a story that I had to deal with a few years back. On the day of the launch of the 16 days of activism on GBV, an intern came to me, this was 10 years ago, and said, "Madam, I am being made very uncomfortable by a male colleague." And I appreciated the courage that she took to come to me. And I said, "What is happening?" And he said, "Well, someone looked inside my blouse and said that I had a very nice tattoo." Now, that tattoo happened to be on her breast, so you can imagine the amount of looking that went into seeing that tattoo and making the comment. And I said, "Has there been any other incidents like this?" And she said, "You know, I've just been getting some really strange looks from this guy, and I've hesitated to come to you, but today it just was too much." Now imagine me coming back from the 16 days of activism and feeling all empowered and everything, only to have someone in my own workplace bring such an issue to my attention. And I called in that male colleague. I spoke to the intern and found out that she, by the way, was not the only one getting unwelcome remarks. As it turned out, that guy had been complimenting women, overly complimenting them, asking a very beautiful young woman there whether she had a sister, complimenting someone else in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. So we had a pattern here. This was not an isolated incident. And I had to sit him down and get him to write an apology to the young woman, get him to deliver a verbal apology, but also get him to take again the course on workplace harassment that we have in our particular offices. What really struck me was that this individual didn't seem to understand what he was doing. It didn't seem that there was anything wrong about it. As I probed, he told me, where I come from, in my previous organization, it was okay. My boss used to even slap women on the back. So for me, I was just being nice to a colleague, complimenting them. This poses the most critical issue that we deal with when we talk about GVV and sexual harassment. It's an issue of mindset and an issue of culture. It's an issue of entrenched patriarchal behaviors, entrenched social norms that make it acceptable.
We are now joined by popular musician Fungisai Masharavi. Thank you for joining us on the Diplomat Couch.
Thank you so much. Greetings to you all.
As you may know, the 8th of March was International Women's Day, and the UN Women theme is Digital Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality. And during the breakfast, you shared about how, in as much as social media, digital spaces are there to also elevate women's arts and crafts in your musical industry, but it also has become such a toxic space. And this morning's breakfast was about creating safe workspaces for women. Maybe you can elaborate more on what you shared.
Okay, yeah, true. It's very true that whilst we appreciate, the strides, whilst we appreciate that it's working towards the emancipation of women, making them participants online, which means they have contact with the international world, they have contact with the global village. But if it's left unattended and unregulated as it is, you realize that there is a risk that it will do more harm than it's supposed to serve. So I don't know how best we can go around it, but perhaps let's start by creating awareness to the general public. Because whilst these abuses are happening, the sexual harassment, let me just mention them, just a few. We're talking of sexual harassment, we're talking of body shaming, we're talking of derogatory languages being used against women, especially in the entertainment industry per se. And I'm saying maybe it's time we come together as a society and probably address the root cause for this, because I want to believe that these abuses are happening on the backdrop of an androcentric society, whereby we believe that men have a right to some extent, and we are even seen as women, backing them up, because you realize that when a fellow artist is being bashed, you'd even see other women on the forefront. Why? Because they are reinforcing how they've been brought up. It's like they would be supporting even the patriarchy as it is destroying, the woman. And I think let's come together and address that situation and, perhaps bring change, starting by making this conversation and questioning the way we handle each other on social media, so that at the end of the day, we can maximize on the benefits that it awards women who find themselves on those platforms. Let's not use it to attack and destroy the woman. I believe women are the future of this society.
Going back to creating safe workspaces for women in the arts industry, do you think there are frameworks or systems that are set up where, let's say, a female artist who's been sexually harassed by maybe a producer or another fellow artist can safely go and report such an incident without being prejudiced or, victim shamed?
We do have legal frameworks that have been put in place, maybe at a global level, at a national level. We're talking of some of these ratified instruments which have been, some have been reduced to laws that we work with as Zimbabwe. But the question is the artist aware of those legal frameworks? Does the artist know the laws that are there to protect them? So half the time women are oppressed, they are marginalized, and they are abused in silence for fear, of being victimized further, because that has been the practice, especially in the music industry, whereby women can be sexually harassed or abused by promoters, and other partners in the music. But at the end of the day, because of these societal values, people would rather throw it under the carpet for fear, of being victimized. Because once you stand up and speak and say, so and so abused me, it's usually the woman who has to carry the shame. People don't even consider the circumstances around it. So a lot of young women in the entertainment industry, they suffer a lot of prejudices, social injustices from producers, you name it, the whole chain of production in different productions. So the challenge is they keep quiet, because in as much as there are channels to speak up about it, they are not courageous enough to speak. Yes, we have the Zimura, Zimbabwe Music Rights Association. It's we have the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe, and I want to believe they are there standing for us to accommodate everyone so that we have a safe work environment. But who is confident enough to face the realities and tell the world that I am going through this, and not face stigmatization at the end of the day? So people fear being stigmatized.
Thank you very much for sharing this insight and sharing your experience as an artist. That's your workspace as a woman, and the strides that have been taken. It's been a pleasure having you on the Diplomat Couch. Now we're joined by Rubizai Kahari, who's the founder of the Center for African Women Advancement. Welcome to the Diplomat Couch.
Thank you.
Looking to today's breakfast, where the discussion is creating safe spaces for women. You shared about going into journalism, and there was a name attached to it. And there are certain industries where sexual harassment, tolerance for sexual harassment is very low. I mean, it's very high, because these industries are assumed to be for a certain type of woman, or if you're a woman who goes into that industry, then you're expected to tolerate sexual harassment. Maybe if you could share on that as well.
Well, when I was a young woman and I just gotten myself a place at the Polytechnic to start mass communication, I told one of my aunts, he says, you're going to a profession of loose women, cheap publicity, journalism, and all sorts of things were said about that particular profession. So now you have to ask yourself, why would someone who has never worked in that industry think that? So it must have been that because the sexual harassment in journalism is very overt. It is just not within the workspaces. It's also the people whom if you're a female journalist and you're going to interview somebody, you are also going to encounter sexual harassment at some stage. And if you don't have the tools to put boundaries, then you might find yourself now being misconstrued as a loose woman, someone who is going around, sleeping around. So for me, there are certain professions that women go into and they have gained that reputation. So when men are doing that, to sexually harassing them, maybe they don't even think they're sexually harassing. They just think, this is normal, these women, they're easy, they have been doing this and that. But in most cases, they're worried about their job security. It's a profession where you need sources. So you are very vulnerable to issues of sexual harassment. So I think it is very, very, very important, one, to empower female journalists. They need to be empowered to set boundaries. This is what I have been saying. And somebody said to me, but if you set boundaries, you're going to be victimized. So maybe there needs to be a process. Set your boundaries. And once you set your boundaries, are there mechanisms within the organization where you report so that you don't suffer from victimization? And then is there counseling? You know, because not everything needs to end up in court. Because maybe the perpetrator does not know what they're doing. Because as I mentioned in my presentation, there are two types of sexual harassers that I have identified. There are predators who pounce on women in the workplace, pretending it's love, pretending you are dating. You know, they are grooming you into that lifestyle. And then there are economic harassers who, if you don't give me, you will lose your job. If you don't do this, you will do this. So it is very important for women as a whole to learn about the red flags. Like when I got my first job, people were very happy that I found a job. But when a woman gets married, you have older women sitting around you telling you how to behave yourself in marriage. But that same support is not there when you're going to work. Nobody's there to tell you that, you know, you're going into this environment. This is what you are going to encounter. And there's a young woman, I did encounter it. I did get sexually harassed. I did report it. And finally and then I found out now that this perpetrator had even harassed more senior women who hadn't said anything about it. And then when it came to, and then the company said to me, you know what, we can reprimand this person in-house, or we can, you can go to court. But it was my first job. I was a temp at that job. And I thought, if this one goes to court, nobody's gonna hire me in this town because it's gonna be out there in the papers. So there are no safe spaces because we are relying on a legal framework, because once it goes to court, it's now he said, she said, and it's now your character on the line. And that many women in their right minds who are thinking of their career might decide not to take that route and probably just leave the job quietly. Yeah.
It's interesting when you shared that, when you mentioned to an aunt. And so sometimes it's the women who perpetuate some of these social norms. They make it look normal. You said it's an aunt who said you're going into a profession. Yes. And we talk a lot about sexual harassers, but I don't think much talk is made about victim blamers. You go and report and then you're blamed. And, you know, so what do you think we can do to educate and create awareness to say we need to also create spaces where when women come and report, we shouldn't be the perpetuators of certain actions. We shouldn't normalize certain things. Also corporates should create safe spaces within their organizations where women can report.
These safe spaces, like I was advising women, it's important first off to read the company policy, the policies of the organization. And if they are silent on sexual harassment, like what we had in the meeting, it's important to ask your HR that, you know, what if my boss asks me out? How does the company redress that situation? So I think the most important thing is know your rights, because a person who knows their rights is empowered. Because also, having said that, there are some women who have gone through that and they have so-called consented, but pressure has been brought to bear upon them, and in their minds they're now thinking, oh, I'm actually having a relationship, a real relationship, yet it started as sexual harassment. So I think it is important for us as women, when we enter those spaces, to know our rights, but most importantly also to know our conduct. Because things that start coming out when you report, it will be, oh, but she was dressed like this and that. So it is important that we also manage our environment when we walk into the workspace, and to ensure that the company we are working for is prepared to protect us. Because if they're not prepared to protect us, then you know that, if this eventuality should happen, you are going to be on your own. So, and then also creating within those spaces, as women, having spaces in those companies where we can talk about what we are going through. Because sometimes everybody's in their silo and they are suffering silently. But I think if we make an effort like, okay, in this company we have a ladies' Wednesday or whatever, because women, we are very good at social gatherings, and we discuss these things, then we will find that if we now tackle it together, we will win this battle. And as long as we are being managed in cycles, and it's whispers in the hallway, and already we are calling each other names, then it will be very difficult to get out of this dark hole.
It will be a long journey.
It will be a long journey.
Thank you very much, Rumi, for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me. And all the best to all the young women who are entering corporates. Represent us well.
We've heard from the speeches and the different speakers, and we've also spoken to some of the guests today, and they've shared their experiences from different industries about safe workspaces for women and the strides that have been taken. In as much as we celebrate how far we've come, we still have a long way to go. And we hope today's episode has been enlightening to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Until next episode, it's goodbye.